First, just say thank you to Orky for putting on CI Days and inviting us out to talk to you, because the people in this room are actually the people that we really want to talk to and hear about your needs and let you know about many of the resources that are going on campus to help you out with your research, teaching and learning endeavors, as well as anything else that you may want to do at the university. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to kind of be breaking this up into 3 sections. They're all kind of related. So the very first one, I will be giving a brief overview of the visualization landscape, services available to you, typically either free of charge or at a very low cost. Then after that, Ted Hall from the 3D Lab will be talking about visualization concepts. So if you've never really done visualization before, or you're just starting to think about it, he's going to point out a couple things that are important to keep in mind while you're thinking about it. And then finally, Brock from the CAC will be demonstrating VisIt. Okay, so basically there's a lot of resources here on campus. Sadly, very few people actually know about them. We often get people who come in at the end of their tenure, or students who are just about to graduate and say, I wish I knew you existed. And what we try to do is we try to do open houses, we try to do outreach, but because of the highly dynamic nature of the university and the fact that we're all pretty busy, it becomes difficult to reach everyone, which is one of the reasons why we're happy to be here, is because people who are interested in cyber infrastructure, interested in visualization, are here at CI Days. Okay, so these are the few things that I'm going to be talking about. Basically, initially, giving an overview of what the 3D Lab does. We have quite a few resources available for you, and our model makes it very easy for you to use. And then breaking down the various services that we offer, such as advanced visualization, digital fabrication, motion capture, the various other resources that we have, as well as consultation, project development, and teaching and learning support. Okay, so what is the 3D Lab? The 3D Lab is actually part of the library. And so a lot of times people think of that as kind of like an odd relationship. What does all this high-tech, resources have to do with the library? If you think about the library as a collection of very expensive resources and the expertise that goes along with those resources to help you navigate those resources, it makes a little bit more sense of why we're in the library. So who and where are we? So basically we're on North Campus currently. We're in the Duderstadt Center. The Duderstadt Center is a great location for a lot of activity. There's a lot of things going on in that building. If you've never been out there, come on out. We're an open door, so if you're in the area, drop in, and we like to think that we're friendly, and so come on in and talk with us. We currently have 6 full-time staff and 16 students working on various projects and initiatives that we have going on in the lab. We also have an additional group of UROP students. We're firm believers in supporting the UROP program and trying to get them involved in real-world skill-building, research-oriented projects. We provide services to faculty, students, and staff. So it doesn't matter who you are. Just if you have an idea, just come and talk to us. We'll talk you through it. And even if we're not the right group for it, we don't have any problems, we don't have any ego problems in directing you to the right people. We have a certain set of resources. If you can use them, great, wonderful. If not, we typically know who you can talk to get what you need to done. And the need for funding really depends on how much of the resources you're going to use. Much like in the library, you can walk in the door, get some basic help. But if you need to do a deep research project, we typically ask to be involved because it's going to use a lot of resources, and being a shared resource, other people need resources too. So we can't tie it up for a long period of time, specifically for one person's project. Okay, so now I'm going to get into just kind of like a quick overview of the various services. There's a lot here, but just know that there's an open house coming up on January 20th, and I'll mention that again at the end, where you can see all of these in action. Also, don't feel like you have to wait for the open house to come and talk with us, okay? As mentioned, we're an open resource, so just come on in, talk to us, and there's plenty of people around to help you answer your questions and see what you want to do. Okay, so on the first side, advanced visualization. Now we're using a little bit of a loose visualization. Sometimes when people think about visualization, they're only thinking about hard numerical data that is turned into a picture of some kind. We're actually extending that to include conceptualization, the visualization that I just mentioned, also simulations, as well as just demonstrations in some cases. Sometimes you may have a concept that you just really need to get out there. Sometimes it could be for a grant to help with the grant process. Sometimes it could be for teaching and learning or outreach. We help with that as well. Okay, so we have three major pieces of technology associated with advanced visualization: the MyDen, a stereo wall, and a tile display. Now the tile display is a 9-panel display. And so what this is really great at is, imagine that you have a very complex data set. It could be something biomedical, like what you see up there, or it could be statistical analysis, it could be an architectural drawing, circuit design, whatever. But it's a very complex, dense data set. When you're looking at it on a monitor, whether it's a laptop or a desktop computer, you're often doing a lot of scanning, zooming to move around the image or the data set. So zooming into something to see all the details and then pulling back to see the context. One of the nice things about the tile display is that you get the high resolution of a single monitor, but you also see more of the context around it all at the same time because you have multiple monitors tied together. Now, this system is free for people to use, so if you want to use it, just come on in, sit down and start using it. Your regular login should work. It's also connected to the Flux system, so we can actually pull in some data in there. Now, we're still working on that connection and building it up, as well as the infrastructure around it, so that it has a fatter pipe leaving that room so that you can pull more data and get more information in there. But if you're dealing with very high resolution images or data sets, this could be a nice option for you for exploring those data sets. Okay, now we also have a stereo wall. A stereo wall is very similar to what you see in the movie theaters now. So it's just a very widescreen stereoscopic projection system. This system is very easy to generate content for. You just basically need two images, or one image split down the middle, where the left side's for the left eye, right side's for the right eye. You can actually see on the left screen down here, we have an example of that with a 3D TV. So you're welcome to come up and check it out a little bit later if you've never seen a 3D TV or just want to see how that process works. The stereo wall is very easy to use. It's fairly large. It's over 12 feet wide, wide aspect ratio. Great for presentations, group showings. It can do pre-rendered movies. It can do 3D PowerPoints. It can also do interactive simulations. And it actually rests in our pipeline. So if someone comes to us with data, we usually test it out on the desktop, move it over to the stereo wall, and then if everything looks well on the stereo wall, then we move it into the next device, which is the MyDen. Now, you may be familiar with a Cave device. And this is very similar to the Cave device, just Cave is a registered trademark, and we have totally different hardware, software, and configuration. But it's the same concept. Basically, it's a 10 by 10 room, where every surface of that room is a projected surface. So as you walk into this 10 by 10 space, the computer is actually tracking where you are within that space. At the movie theater, when you put on those 3D glasses, if you get up and you walk to the aisle, you're not going to see anything new in the in what's projected on the screen because it's already generated for an average point of view that the whole audience shares. With the MyDen, you are the only viewer. You can have multiple people around you, but the computer calculates everything for your point of view. This allows you to walk around objects, look underneath virtual objects, and just really be immersed in the data set. And we've actually had some individuals have discoveries with their data when they were immersed inside of this data set that they didn't get from the stereo wall or laptop visualization method. And it's one of those things that are very difficult to paint a picture of in people's minds. I highly recommend that you come out and see it firsthand because it really is unique, yes. Well, ray tracing is like a rendering method to generate the visuals. And so we use a lot of different techniques to create very realistic visuals, as well as very scientific visualizations as well. Okay, so typically this is a few images of other uses of the space. A professor over in architecture is using it to create kind of a visual lab, like a lighting lab and an acoustic lab virtually. So measuring how your eyes respond in the real world and then recreating that inside of this virtual world so that we can use this and get the same physical response from a virtual world as you can in the real world. And so just making it that much more of virtual reality, much closer to that. Now generally you would use something like the Den or stereo wall, or in some cases even the tile display. Things are too expensive to do in the real world, they don't exist in the real world, or they're too dangerous to do in the real world. And there are quite a few examples of projects that we've done in the past that satisfy all three. One classic example that we use is a virtual disaster simulator that we did with emergency medicine. They wanted to put residents through a mass casualty situation to see how they handle triage, to see how they handle all these different stimuli when confronted in a very stressful situation. So we put them into this virtual world, lots of animated, gory creatures, well, not creatures, characters, you know, hurt and, you know, screaming and all these different things. And they would have to go around and triage them. And it was really interesting. And the only thing I can say is that if you're ever in that situation, hopefully not move. Try to move in some way, because a few of the residents ended up just saying, oh, black tag, move on. Black usually means dead. Don't waste your time. So if you can move, make noise, anything like that, do it. Because it's they have to make very quick decisions. And when you have like 15 people that you have to triage, some of them require attention, some of them don't, you have to make a lot of decisions and make them very quickly. Okay, so we also have augmented reality glasses. So augmented reality is basically a way of taking 3D visualizations or geometry or objects and projecting them onto the real world. So this is really great for actually quite a few purposes. Say I wanted to recreate the experience that we're having here, but to have a 3D object floating in the middle of the room. I would not want to spend all the time modeling and recreating everybody and everything in this space, when the only thing that we want to do is just add something to what is already here. And that is what augmented reality is really great for. So it's being used for virtual maps. You're walking around town, you hold up your phone, and it points out what building you're looking at, tells you more about it. It can also be used for collaborative discussions. Multiple people could be sitting around the same table, 3D object in the middle of the table, and then people are looking at it either through glasses or some sort of mobile device. And so there's a lot of potential for augmented reality in the future. And personally, I think that this is where advanced visualization is going, because projectors are very expensive, high maintenance, and so forth. And there's often limitations in a multi-user experience. If we wanted to get everybody in here visualizing a life-size visualization, it'd be very difficult to do in a projector-based environment. However, if you personalize these things, if everybody has their own view through a pair of augmented reality glasses or a mobile device, it becomes a lot easier, much more cost-effective, and so forth. Now, what ties a lot of this together for us is a piece of software called Jugular. Jugular is something that we wrote in-house, mostly out of need. We went through a lot of different software packages, but because we're an open service facility, a lot of the packages didn't serve our needs because they'd often specialize in a particular group or a particular market. And we need to be very diverse. We need to be able to handle anyone who comes in the door. They could be from biomedicine, they could be from design, they could be from really anywhere on campus. And we've actually worked with just about every department on campus to date. And so because of that, we had to design some software that could handle the diversity of content that we were receiving. And that is the Jugular platform. And there's a few things that are quite unique about it, such as a very advanced lighting system. You can actually get realistic light bouncing in real time in an environment. So if you're doing kind of like an experience-based simulation, it's great because you get this nice soft lighting. If you look at the top image there, you can see how the blue curtain is bouncing onto the walls. And so it just creates a much more realistic lighting environment, increases the sense of immersion, and then people really get sucked into the simulation or into the experience. Okay, now there are a couple other options on campus, such as the SAN lab, which is also part of the library. You need geospatial data, they are the people to talk to. They are great, they will handle all that stuff for you. Also, there's the Kane Advanced Computing Center. They're great as well. They're responsible for Flux. They do all kinds of cool things, and Brock will probably talk about that in a little bit more detail when he's talking. Then also there's the Clinical Simulation Center. The Clinical Simulation Center often focuses on medical innovations and medical education surrounded around high technologies and simulators. Now we also have digital fabrication. I'm going to rip through this very quickly. But as before, you can see this in action at the open house. So digital fabrication we're putting into this discussion mostly because sometimes it's helpful to have a physical object representing your data. We've had people dealing with MRI, CT scans that they wanted to have a physical model of whatever that scan represented in their hand to look at. We've had individuals who wanted to print out molecules so that they had a physical model of a molecule, either for their class or just, you know, a paperweight. You know, you can use it for whatever purposes you want. And so rapid prototyping will take a digital model and make it physical. And so what you can do is actually print out your 3D data. There are certain considerations to keep in mind, which I don't have time to go into, but we can help you down that process. So if you ever feel like you could use a real, physical, tangible 3D object of your data, come talk to us about rapid prototyping. And so we have three options. So we have 3D printers, which are basically plaster-based, often treated afterwards. It can be printed in color, so if you have stress information and so forth. There's also fused deposition modeling, which is plastic-based, great for brackets, product design, industrial design, and so forth. The robots there on the right-hand side, I'll use special clamps and clips and all these things that the students designed and then print it out on our printer. And because they could print them out on our printer at a very high rate, they were able to actually submit many more robots to the competition than other teams. And they actually walked away with $750,000 prize. So they did a pretty good job. Now there are a couple other areas on campus that does this sort of service as well. The Medical Innovation Center. They have very high resolution medical grade plastic or resin printing. There's also the Fab Lab, which is part of the School of Architecture. And then there's actually a foundry here on campus at the School of Art and Design. So if you need to do metal casting, there are some options there as well. We also have 3D scanning capabilities. So if you have a real object and you want to bring it into the computer to either modify, replicate, preserve digitally, whatever your application, we have some 3D scanning capabilities as well. And so our three major pieces of technology are laser scanners, contact digitizers, and photogrammetry. So laser scanners, as the name implies, uses lasers. So you have to put these little markers on your object, and using lasers, it records the surface data. No color information, but fairly accurate. You also have contact digitizers. If you just want to measure key points on an object, it's great for that. You would not want to scan a face or something else with that, because you'd be putting down a lot of points and it'd take you a very long time. And then we have photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is something that we're getting into more now, where it basically allows you to take a lot of photographs of an object. You don't even have to touch it. And using computer vision algorithms, it creates a three-dimensional mesh pseudo-automatically from it. Depending on what you're trying to create, will depend on your success. And what we're trying to do is create a best practices guide and a bunch of training materials. So if you want to do this, you can actually do it yourself. And the great thing is that you can use everything from a very nice camera down to a cell phone and get some results. Yes?
Is this actually sparse bundle adjustment, or is it for
Image matching. Yep. Okay, and then there's a couple other scanning options, or actually one in particular. There's the full body scanner down at Elm Tree, which is the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. And Matt Reed there is eager for collaborators. So if you have a need for a full body scanner, it's very quick. I went through it myself, and it's great. So if you need full body scanning, contact them. They're eager to work with you. We're also looking at using the Kinect as a scanning device. It can actually put out a lot of points, a very dense point cloud. And we're looking into how to convert that into a nice usable mesh. So a very low cost system, mostly just relying on software at this point to get it to do what we want. There's also, the next step is typically once you have this data, you have to clean it up, or you have to perhaps extract data from an MRI, CT scan. We have a lot of software that does this, but there's also a service on campus, the 3D imaging laboratory in radiology. They do a lot of this for the health systems, but they're open to collaborators as well. Now we have motion capture, just like what you see in the movies, and it's been used for a lot of different purposes. So a lot of performances, but we've also had some engineers who have used it to give autonomous behavior to, say, helicopters. So in that particular example, the creator would walk around the room and have helicopters follow, either defend him or attack him, based on his position. And so if you just think about the system as something that can track motion, it doesn't have to be a person, just track motion in general, that could be a great potential use for this. So if you have an idea, whatever it is, we've had people track lips for medical purposes, we've had lots of performances, but we also use the same sort of system to track your head and whatever else we want in the MyDen to figure out just basically where you are. Now we have a lot of workstations. We would like to see them heavily used. These workstations can be used for classes, they can be used for student project work. They're fairly capable computers, and with lots of very nice displays attached to them. We have a lot of software on these computers. We don't have quite nearly as much as Kane, but if you see something that you need and you need it in that space for some reason, let us know. We'll talk with Kane and see if there's something that we can work out. Otherwise, in the same building, there's a lot of very high-powered computers on multiple floors that are run by Kane that has a lot of other pieces of software. So if you don't see what you need here, in the same building, very close, there's a lot of other free resources for you to use. We also have an emotive epoch, which is an EEG brain wave reading device. We've used that to navigate virtual scenes, evaluate what's happening in people's brains as they're experiencing some of these things, and so forth. Teaching and learning is a big part of what we do. So research is an important aspect, but also teaching and learning. We currently support 4 classes in a very large capacity, providing them resources, providing them technical support, and so forth. A lot of times the classes that use our spaces want to integrate this cutting edge technology into their curriculum. So if you want to use some of this technology in your curriculum or have an idea of using some of the stuff, just come and talk to us. We're very open to those sort of things. And then finally, I'm running actually way over, we do a lot of project development. So I gave you an overview of a lot of the hardware that we have, a lot of the equipment. But actually what ties it together is the expertise that we can offer. Everyone within the lab has a deep background in their area of expertise. And when you come in the door, even if you don't know how it's going to get done, you just have an idea. We often will sit down with you, work it out, and figure out if we can help you, if someone else can help you, and just kind of work through those initial parts of the project. From there, sometimes we actually do the project for the individual, so they don't even have to do all the coding, artwork, or whatever else may be involved. We can do a lot of that as well. So really, if you have an idea, just come and talk to us. We're very open to new ideas. And in many cases, this has taken forms that we did not anticipate initially. So there's advanced visualization, as we've all talked about, like medical simulations and so forth. But another example is in like the upper left-hand corner, a mobile game for rehabilitation medicine that tries to teach health competencies to those with spinal cord injuries. So another one is lower right-hand corner, which is a online game that was done for general practitioners to learn better techniques for communicating with patients. And in that, you can actually be a good doctor or a bad doctor. And you can have a lot of fun with it. But we also have like jet ski driving simulators. We have a virtual football trainer. We have, you know, all of these different unique projects that come in the door. And that's what we do, is we're very flexible, and we just try to respond to whoever's coming in the door. So it's really like the flavor of the month. Who walks in the door depends on what we're focusing on at that moment. Okay, so and then finally, in terms of project development, there's the Office of Enabling Technologies over in the medical school. So they often focus on information and communication technologies and often focus on the health system for their project development. Okay, so final points, you know, the open house, lots of resources on campus. But try to think about visualization a little bit early in your project. A lot of times people come to us with visualization as an afterthought. Just try to come a little bit early. Even if you don't plan on using it right away, just to think about what some of the considerations may be. And just come talk to us. So I'm going to turn it over to Ted, who's going to be continuing this theme, and then over to Brock, and then there'll be time for questions at the end.
So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about visualization concepts, 3D visualization in particular, since we are the 3D lab. I'll start with perspective projection, because that's sort of the core of everything. We have 3D data, and we're trying to visualize it on some kind of a 2D screen, right? Projector screen, computer screen. And so we start with the concepts of perspective. This was invented hundreds of years ago in the Renaissance. Architects have been doing this forever. The computer does basically what architects have been doing for centuries. It does it algebraically instead of with a straight edge and a pencil. But it's you have a station point. We have a laser pointer here. There we go. So you have a viewpoint where you're standing. You have some object you're looking at. In this case, a yellow cube. Let's say that's a physical cube. And I project lines from my eye through each point of the cube onto a screen. And wherever it hits the screen, that's where that point appears to be. So I can sort of label all the points on the cube, and I can project each point onto the screen and sort of connect A to B to C. Do that, and I get a perspective picture of that cube. And if I put my eye here, my white drawing lines up with that yellow physical cube. Everything lines up. Everything is proportional. With monoscopic perspective, as this is, there's a little ambiguity because I don't know whether that cube is a small thing close to my eye or a big thing away. Once I've taken the photograph and now I have this picture and I'm looking at it, if it's not something that I recognize through the context, if it's not a familiar object, there's ambiguity about how big it is. It could be large and far away, it could be small and close to my face. And of course, Hollywood, before computer graphics, used this routinely. You know, you build a little model and get your camera up close and you've got a starship. Well, in 3D visualization, we try to eliminate that ambiguity because, you know, we can't really, we need to see things in 3D. And so it all depends on the fact that your two eyes have slightly different views of the world. That's where 3D visualization is in stereo projection. You've got two eyes, a left eye and a right eye. There we are. Left eye, right eye, and they're both looking at this cube, and they end up with different views, different projected images. When we play that backward, now we have these projected images, and we put them on the screen, and we put you in front of the screen, somehow those two views. So the left eye only sees what it should see, the right eye only sees what it should see. And for most of the people, it's sort of, you know, 3D perception is kind of like color perception. Most people have it. Some people are colorblind. Some people have problems with depth perception. But for the bulk of the population, the brain is able to stitch those two views together, and they perceive a thing in space wherever those two lines intersect. So if my right eye sees the point here and my left eye sees the point here, my brain figures it must be there. Where else could it be? And so again, we do that for all those points. And now it's the size of this thing is unambiguous because those lines only intersect in one place. And so it creates a very strong illusion that this thing is there in that place. Now, once that picture is frozen, the perspective doesn't change if you move. If that's like in a cinema or on a 3D television, it's not tracking you. So if you now move relative to that thing, your brain is going to get this illusion that this object is twisting to follow you because the perspective isn't changing as it ought to change. And so you would get that in a cinema if you could walk back and forth across the screen without annoying all of the other people, or if you get close to a 3D television and move back and forth, or in front of our stereo wall where we're not doing head tracking yet, and sort of do this, kind of get the illusion that this thing is twisting to follow you. What we do in the Maiden is we track you. And so we update all these perspectives according to where you're sitting. And so it does create this very strong illusion that there's this virtual thing in the space with you. This cube doesn't exist anymore. What exists are you, the screen, and the projected image that's constantly being updated. And if we do this fast enough, and by fast enough we mean like at least 30 frames a second we like to do, and we filter those two views, left eye, right eye, your brain is stitching together a virtual thing in the space with you, and you can move left or right and look at it from different sides, and it creates a strong illusion of this ghostly thing in the space with you. So we have two different images that we're projecting onto a common screen. We need some way to filter those images. And these are three very typical ways. Anaglyph, this dates back to the 60s when they first tried 3D movies. You have complementary colors on the lenses. So the left eye sees only the red, and the right eye sees everything except red, complementary colors. So red cyan, that's the most common. People have also tried blue yellow and green magenta, and I can't tell you why the red cyan seems to be the most common, but it is. If you go to the cinema, typically they're using polarization. So they're basically sunglasses with different polarization in the two lenses. It can be linear or circular. The Real D stuff now that you know is recent that Disney uses, it's circular polarization. One is clockwise and one is counterclockwise. And what does that mean? There's a nice Wikipedia article. You can fight through the math and see what they're doing with these waves. And finally, there are shutter glasses. And this is what 3D television uses. It's also what we use in the Maiden. Shutter glasses, it's not actually drawing both views at the same time. It's actually switching back and forth between a left view and a right view. And it does it so fast that your eye doesn't notice the flicker, hopefully. And then there's typically an infrared or a radio frequency signal that synchronizes the glasses with the screen. So when the right view is on the screen, the left lens goes dark. And when the left view is on the screen, the right lens goes dark. And so 110 times per second it's switching back and forth. And again, it's like watching a movie. If the frames are fast enough, your brain stitches it together into some coherent thing. So these are data paths to get stuff into this system. We can take sort of raw image data that came from CT scans or MRI scans. We can feed it into this software Mimics, and from that we can look for density boundaries and create a 3D mesh from that. We can also scan things in, as Eric mentioned. We have this handheld scanner where people bring us physical things and we can scan them in a few hours and create a mesh. These are all very popular modeling programs that architects and artists use. 3D Studio Max, Maya, SolidWorks is an engineering package, Rhinoceros. My slide is getting clipped for some reason. This is SketchUp, Google SketchUp. And all of these things do 3D modeling and export files that we can typically use. So the output from all of this stuff is 2D images. We can take those scans directly, or it might go through Mimics and give us some stuff. All of these modeling things, of course, you can do screen captures and capture perspectives and save rendered images. The two file formats that we use the most for 3D stuff, whether it's visualization or printing, are VRML files. That's pronounced VRML, Virtual Reality Modeling Language. The file extension is WRL, which I think stands for World, and Stereolithography, STL. So there's others, like if you come to us with some other format, we can work with you if you've got a custom format. A lot of times it's not too difficult for us to get it into one of these forms if we know what you have. And here's some of the data sync. So here's what you have available if you want to actually make a physical thing. We can't make physical things out of 2D images, but we can take the VRML files and we can send them to the Z-Core powder binder printer, and that can actually print in color. So if you've got color in your model and you save it as a VRML, you can print it here and actually have a colored print. The ABS plastic machines cannot print in color. They take STL files, and STL doesn't carry any color information. But this thing uses the same material as this one. We don't even bill for this because it uses the leftover material. When these guys say they're empty, they still have a lot of material. So we put it here. This is actually a kit that you can buy and put together for yourself in your basement. So we don't charge for this. It runs on Linux. The idea, it's all open source. It runs on Linux. It's a kit you can buy for $1,500 or so and build. And it's using surplus material from these guys. For visualization, these are our main data sinks. We can take your 2D images and drop them straight on the tile display. If you're looking at CAT scans, MRI scans, whatever it might be, high definition renderings, we can put them there. Of course, we can put them on the stereo wall. And the stereo wall is its strongest thing is if you give it stereo pairs. If you do separate renderings of left eye, right eye, and put it on there, then you can see it in 3D. The MIDEN is inherently a 3D thing, and it depends on head tracking and generating perspectives in real time. So it doesn't really have an output path from 2D images. It needs 3D data. And it also can't use STL. So our main format for that is these VRML files. But again, if you've got some other format, we can work with you. I'll repeat a few things that Eric mentioned, but I'll just sort of reiterate. We've got this tile display. Each of these 9 panels is HD. Each one of these 9 panels is 1920 by 1080 pixels, like a megapixel basically. And so we've got 9 megapixels on this screen. And you sit in front of it. We can't do stereo on it. Well, we could probably do anaglyph. We can't do the active or the path. Thank you. Do the polarized. But you sit in front of it, and it's a large screen, and it really fills your peripheral vision. So you can see detail, and it also fills your peripheral vision. And we can, we measure everything. The software, we can say exactly what the dimensions of this screen are. We can measure that screen and say exactly where it is relative to you. And so we can really tune the perspective so it's as if you're sitting in front of a big window looking at 3D stuff. And even without the stereo, you get a sense of 3D just because the perspective is correct. stereo wall, again, we can put 3D PowerPoint on this thing, and the way that happens is you bring a stereo pairs. So over here on the side is actually the monitor that's driving that screen. The screen itself is 9 by 16, 16 by 9 aspect ratio. We set up the PowerPoint slide to be 32 by 9. And we take the left image and put it on the left half of the slide and the right image on the right half of the slide. And the computer thinks it's drawing to a 32 by 9 screen, but it's actually splitting that across two projectors that are aligned physically to superimpose those two images on one screen. And so you need a screen that preserves the polarization. It's a little hard to see there, but there are polarizing filters in front of those projectors, oppositely polarized, linear at different angles, or if it's circular, one is clockwise, one is counterclockwise. You then polarizing glasses that filter those two views, and you get to 3D view. So that data set actually was brought to us by Jason Liu in the physics department. These are stereo views of the sun photographed millions of miles apart from two different satellites. So you can go into our lab and you can see the sun as a ball emitting flares and things in 3D. We have stills in PowerPoint, and we also have a 3D movie that we've stitched together. And the MIDAN, as I mentioned, is a very immersive space. It needs 3D data to be in there. This is a good example of a data set that did not come to us in VRML format, but was trivial for us to convert, because all of these nodes, all we needed was X, Y, Z coordinates for the center point, radius, color, and label. And the links, all we needed to know was which two nodes are connected and what color the link is. And so it was very trivial for us to get that into a format that we could display here. The same software runs on the MIDAN, runs on the stereo wall, and runs on the tile display. And runs on the desktop, and runs on the 3D TV. So we have the same software, supports lots of different display environments. This is an example of architecture in full-scale architecture. This is the Yoast Ice Arena. That, they projected it in there to preview some modifications that are proposed. And this is an example of, unfortunately, it's a bit dark, but it's sort of a medieval castle. And we can track, besides your head, we can track the game controller. So we can make that game controller behave like a virtual flashlight. And wherever you point it, that's where the light shines. And it does the shadows in real time. It does the light bounces in real time. And by real time, we mean you have to get those in like 30 milliseconds or less. So we don't have the luxury of spending a minute to render one of these scenes. We have to pump them out fast. Actually, during an open house once when I was demonstrating this flashlight, somebody wanted me to stand in front of the screen because they almost couldn't believe that this game controller wasn't emitting light. They wanted to see if I would cast a shadow. But of course I don't, because it's all in the computer. So fundamentally, what's in a 3D model are vertices, polygons, normal vectors, and textures. So the pink nodes there are the vertices. Each one of those has X, Y, Z coordinates. There are 8 of them, so my model would have 8 X, Y, Z, numbered 0 through 7, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. Those get stitched together into faces, into polygons, and the order matters. So typically we do counterclockwise ordering on all of these faces. Okay, here's the vertices. You'll notice this face is counterclockwise, this face is counterclockwise, this face is counterclockwise on the bottom. What happens if I could see through the cube to the opposite face? If the cube is facing away from me, it'll look clockwise. And that's how I know it's facing away from me. So there are algorithms that we can use to speed up rendering. If a polygon is backward, it must be on the back side of the face, and so I don't have to render it. And so that turns out to be very important for speeding up rendering. Normal vectors are used for lighting calculations. They are normally normal to the surface, but not necessarily. You can tweak those vectors to adjust the way the lighting works. The things that we sort of expect you to know about your model when you come to talk to us. We'd like to know what software you used, what the file format is. We really need to know what's your coordinate unit. If you want to see this thing in 3D, in the MIDAN we can make it full scale, but we need to know, are your units feet, inches, meters, centimeters, millimeters? We need to know that so that we can set up the scaling properly. We need to know which axis is up. A lot of Modeling software puts the z-axis up, but a lot of graphics software puts the y-axis up. And so we need to know that if you don't want to see your building sideways. We need to know the magnitude of your coordinates. Where is this thing in space? So we can put the viewer within that space. Other stuff, if you've got textures, how many, how big are they? Are you trying to do translucency? Is there sound? Because we can project sound in the MIDE and we can attach sound to moving objects in that space and do Doppler effects. And what type of interaction do you need? Basic navigation? Do you need collision? Do you need billboards? There are some caveats when you're modeling. Modeling is a skill that needs to be learned. And it's best if we get clean models. If they're not clean, then we have to clean them up, and that takes more time. One is to find that polygons and textures are resources. Allocate them wisely. I'll point out this little gray thing here that you'll get a closer look at later. I'll also note right now that see how smooth the shading is? That's because of the way the normal vectors were treated. In this next view, you can see facets. It's actually exactly the same geometry. The only difference is that here all of those normal vectors are really perpendicular to the planes, whereas in the previous view, it's doing an average normal at each vertex, and that causes the lighting to smooth out, even though there's a small number, well, not small, but a finite number of polygons. So there it is with facets, just different rendering, same data basically. Here it is in wireframe to give you a better idea of how many polygons are on this chair. There's probably way more than they need to do that rendering. Now, if you're spending minutes or hours rendering a scene and you really care about this chair, fine. But in the MIDE, we have to do 8 perspectives in 30 milliseconds of whatever environment you're, because we have to do left and right eye on 4 different surfaces every frame. And if you've got a room full of these things, if you're doing a hotel lobby, that starts to add up. That Yoast Ice Arena, when we first got it, 8 million polygons in furniture that we had to spend quite a bit of time cleaning up. And so that little thing there, that little thing has a bunch of polygons, and they don't need to be there. The whole thing could probably be omitted, but if it really had to be there, it could be a texture. It doesn't need to be facets. If you're mirroring something, don't use a negative scale factor. Look for, in your modeling software, look for a command for mirroring. So here's my asymmetric widget on the right-hand side, and I think I'm going to make a left-handed widget by just doing a negative X scale factor. But what happens is it screws up the ordering of the points. They're not counterclockwise anymore. Now they're clockwise, and the normals may or may not get reversed. And so the software gets very confused about what faces to draw. What we're actually seeing here are the inside faces instead of the outside faces because of the mirror imaging. So don't use negative scale factors to mirror something. Don't intersect coplanar surfaces. If you've got texture, it's going to get mushy. If you're using colors, you're going to see a lot of shimmering. When this thing rotates, it's constantly shimmering because the software can't resolve which polygon is in front and which one is in back. And finally, if you want to print something, make it watertight. The printers need so-called watertight solids. They cannot be disjoint planes. So if your planes aren't meeting at the corner, or if they're intersecting in funny ways, that's not going to print. And he's going to have to spend some hours cleaning up this model. That is my last slide, and I'll turn it over to Brock now. You have to change computers, so if there's any quick questions, we could maybe do that now.
For either of us.
I work with microscopes and microscopic organisms, and I would like to make 3D models. Can you folks facilitate some of these things in the parameter scale?
We're gonna need this
Sure.
to-
So you want to make 3D models
Right.
out of.
If I study something like that,
Right.
for other small
Mm-hmm.
cells or small fossils,
Right.
I would like to make 3D models that I can turn around and look like the
And so what is the data that you're currently dealing with? What form does that come in?
Well, I guess that's a difficult thing to say. I mean, it could, you take pictures, just 2D pictures of through the microscope, something like that, with the silicon or glass. So there's a lot of reflective bits.
Sure.
And I could probably render a 3D image just for granted.
So,
Yes.
well, yes,
Okay.
but I think it's going to be a little bit of a longer conversation
Okay,
than I can
okay.
do here. But
Yeah, I know,
I,
this is difficult, so.
I have some potential leads.
Ah,
So
okay.
after this, we'll
Okay.
talk a little bit, and
Yeah.
I'll try to understand your problem a little bit
Perfect.
more.
Okay,
But yeah, absolutely.
okay.
And you ready? Okay. So.
I think so. So, my name is Brock Palin. I'm one of the admins at the Center for Advanced Computing, and I've been working with a tool from Lawrence Livermore National Lab called VisIt. So, don't focus too much on VisIt specifically. I just want you to be aware of certain types of capabilities that are available for visualizing data at a massive scale. I'm focusing mostly on visualizing simulation data. You've ran a simulation, you've got multiple gigabytes of data you want to work with, and normally sometimes these data sets don't fit on your normal standard desktop, or even some of the large systems they have at the 3D lab. So VisIt works in an interesting way. This is kind of illustrated here. It comes in two parts. There's a view that runs on your workstation or display wall, and then there's an engine that actually supports parallelism on a back-end cluster system. And that's represented by the pink cubes there. And the example I'm going to show, I'm actually going to do a live example. I'm going to visualize data where each time step is larger than 4 gigs, which is larger than the memory in my laptop. These data are going to be ray traced in a relatively quick time on 24 CPUs on 2 machines with 96 gigs of total memory. So the nice thing is I don't have to move these data because it equals about a half a terabyte of data in total. We're not going to look at it all. It's just a run I happen to have around. It's 3D data. It comes out of a code called Flash from the University of Chicago. It's a simulation of a supernova surface, and so you can see like swirls and stuff. So I'll actually do that. So first off, though, VisIt. The nice thing about it is, and there's another tool very similar to it called ParaView that comes from Sandia. Comes from Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and it's actually public domain. You can download this. It's free. It supports both Mac, Windows, and Linux. And the nice thing is, like, I'll run the Mac viewer here on my Mac laptop, and the engine is running on a Linux system. They don't have to match. So you can use something like Flux or a couple of machines you have in your lab or something and tie them together and use a separate viewer. The one nice thing about the Mac version is that the parallel capability, because Macs provide parallelism by an MP library from the factory, the parallelism just works out of the box. For Windows and Linux, you have to do some tweaking, but it works quite well. How large can VisIt actually scale? The largest VisIt simulation I'm aware of was on 16,000 processors and visualized a mesh of an entire supernova with over 8 billion, or no, not 8 billion, 8 trillion individual cells in the mesh. So it can scale quite large. So let me actually do this. This is the VisIt website where you can download it, and there's some examples of images there. But let me find, where did I put VisIt? Okay, so here's what VisIt looks like when you start it up. You have one or more visualization windows, and then you have a file viewer. So the interesting thing is when you open a file on this, you actually give it a host name. When you install VisIt, it'll ask you, do you want to install a host profile? And it'll give you a list for a number of the different DOE labs, a number of the national centers. And a lot of national centers provide their own VisIt host profile config. So if the installer doesn't already have one for the site you're planning on using, normally you can talk to your sysadmin and they'll connect you with the needed host profile. We actually provide host profiles for Flux and the engineering cluster NICs in the VisIt installer. So when you download VisIt from Lawrence Livermore, you can just click the UMCAC box and you're good to go. So then it's just as simple as going to Flux, and it will actually remotely connect to the cluster on your behalf. So this is my normal cluster password. And so what this is actually doing now is starting up a process on the cluster, and that looks horrible on that screen. I'm sorry. Now I'm actually looking at files on the cluster. So this is nice, right? Because I'm going to be doing all of this visualization over the wireless connection in here. You have any idea how long it would take to download, even one 4 gigabyte time step? over this kind of network connection. So you want to start with 2D data or 3D data? Go straight into 3D data? Yeah, let's just go straight into 3D data.
You'd actually like to see the comparison of 3D and
2D? Okay. So that's actually a neat thing about the way VisIt works. You can actually visualize data sets from different systems. So you could have data living on Flux, data living on a DOE resource, and data living on your local machine. And you can actually plot them all on top of each other on the same screen. You can actually have multiple of these visualization windows, and you can lock them in both time and position. So you can, maybe say I have I have visualization on, I have data from the crash project, and you can have internal energy, the xenon gas inside this shock tube, as well as the electron temperature, and you can have those on two different things. And you can zoom in on one, and the other one updates itself also, so you can see the same information. I should also point out, because there was a lot of discussion about stereo, this does support stereo in multiple formats, left, right. So you can, we haven't tried it, but we should actually try sticking it on your wall sometime. But it does support stereo. It supports scripting, so you can actually have moving camera and have run the same thing through multiple times. And it supports, as you can see here, many different file formats. Many are common formats. There is, unfortunately, to be able to have this massive scale of being able to support very large data sets. And you don't have to use it for this. I have a protein data bank example in here that's less than a half a megabyte and doesn't need parallelism or anything. Is you can write your own plugins for how to, you can describe your data to VisIt so that it knows how to read it in and understand it. So the data I'm going to be using here is Flash data. And it actually does this nice smart grouping. So here's all my different plot file steps. And so then, because I'm using a remote machine, it's going to actually ask me this. And this is set up by your admin for your host profile. I'm actually going to do a batch job. Because the cluster is batch-based. There's this queuing system where normally you have to submit work to it. VisIt understands all of that and will actually create and submit the batch job for you, which will be spawned. Because Flux consists of 4,000 CPU cores. Finding out which ones are free and which ones you're currently allowed to use, et cetera, is difficult. So the batch system does it all for you. So I'm going to ask for 24 cores. And I'm going to ask just for 1 hour. Now I'm actually going to do something else on another screen, which is just a technical detail because of the amount of memory I need, but really don't worry about it. All this is doing is telling the cluster that I want more memory than was given by default. So I'm asking for 4 gigabytes of memory per processor. So I'm asking for 24 times 4 gigabytes of memory available to me. It's overkill, but that's what Flux is built with, so I just want to make sure I don't run out. Okay, so it's already started. So you can actually see here on the cluster, there's a job that's been automatically submitted for me for 1 hour on 24 cores. So now, though, when I actually go and I'm going to select a file with some interesting information, so I'm going to jump to time step 24 here. I have different types of plots I can create. I can create a pseudo-color plot, which is a lot faster because it's only going to show the surface. So this does not involve ray tracing or anything. This is just regular setup. So if I wanted to see the energy inside, I can just hit draw. And right now, all the work's actually, all the data's being read and all the work's being done on the cluster, and only the resulting image can be sent back to me on this display here. So you can do the usual, you can rotate. Now, one side effect of system is, and I'm getting artifacts, which happens every now and then, is that it's not truly quick and interactive, right? Because this is 4 gigs of data right here. And it's, it has to be sampled down to my display size and everything else. There's a nice tutorial for creating videos. There's just a nice little wizard. And there's abilities to save images of different types, including encapsulated PostScripts, so you can make publication quality images that scale nicely. And there are ways to create vermal and other types of formats. Videos, it supports multiple different types of formats also. It actually will do something interesting. You can visualize data here, and it will save it in a format that is actually an input file for another ray tracer called Pavray. That requires extra tweaking on your part because all it does is give you the geometry. You got to describe how you want things to look and stuff. But you can make these really crazy looking images, especially for like certain types of particle simulations because you can get nice reflections and stuff because that's a high-powered ray tracer. So the way this generally works is, so I could have two windows. So let me, in this second window, plot the same data, the same time step, but I'm going to plot a different variable. In this case, I'm doing the temperature. So it looks pretty similar because the temperature and the energy are quite closely related to each other. But this is kind of how, on the same 24 cores, I can visualize the same pieces of plots at the same time. And I can lock them in perspective, and they both go. And I can do the same thing in time. And so if I want to do things in time, I can just hit play here, and it will just keep stepping through time, doing different pieces. So don't focus too much on the specific application. Just realize that there are tools that if you are given a data set or you're looking at generating a data set that is going to produce massive quantities of data, and you would normally either slice it and visualize a piece at a time or sample it or do other types of capabilities. There is capabilities many times to take all the data directly and be able to, in a scalable way, get all the information you need. There's a couple of other interesting abilities. So let me actually delete these plots and get rid of one of these windows. Let me go ahead and do a volume plot. Now volume becomes harder to do, right? Because now I've got all the internal information. The pseudo-color plot, it can do a lot of approximation. The default volume plots these things create are generally very, very bad because it does it in a fast, high-performance way where you get these really, really poor images. But they have multiple formats, so if I actually go to ray tracing, I'm going to leave it for the default number of samples. And let me actually blow this up to a good size. You always have to be patient with this stuff. You can start seeing some interesting behavior there. You can see, a little bit of swirling and eddying there. So let me actually go to the 2D data now. So I'm going to just go ahead and, oh yeah. So 2D data you can do as a surface plot, so you can kind of get like a 3D representation of something that's 2D. But I'm still just going to go ahead and do just a pseudo-color plot, which is generally the quickest way to do this kind of information. VisIt has the ability also to create derived data. You can actually create expressions refer to variables in your data and kind of make a third variable that is created on the fly, so you don't actually have to calculate it and store it on disk. And there is actually another capability that is advanced, but some people may find useful, especially when you look at starting doing like exascale machines. These machines are absolutely massive, and you're looking at dumping contents of a petabyte of RAM to disk for extreme scale simulation. VisIt has the ability, it has a library called libsim, where you can actually connect the viewer and the entire VisIt runtime to a running simulation. So you can actually pause a running simulation on a machine and read and visualize data structure straight out of memory for a running simulation. So you don't actually ever have to hit disk. You can just see if you're progressing in the direction you want to go. And there's actually been quite a bit of research in this becomes very application specific for, okay, something's not progressing the way I want. Maybe I want to perturb the system where it sits right now in some manner. That's generally something you got to write into your application. but it's generally not something that is unheard of. And did I hit the one bug? It looks like I hit the one bug. This is actually fixed in version 2.4, but there's a bit of integration with setting up the cluster. So let me actually show a different set of data. I'm going to just kill this whole thing. And I'm going to do a smaller set of data just on my laptop to give you an idea of layering multiple plots on top of themselves. I have a data set a CGNS file. CGNS is a standard, commonly used file format for storing certain types of aeronautical data. In this case, it is a YF-17. And so this is what I get. It doesn't look like much because it's a very large boundary, but if you look in, you can start to see it's a negative mesh. It's actually, you have a void where the airplane sits. And it's just half of the plane. So this introduces interesting capabilities because there's additional tools besides just making plots. There's operators. So you can do expressions, so you can derive data, but you can also have these operators where you can do things like take a slice. So if you have 3D data and you want to just take a plane and kind of see a 2D representation at that point, that's where operators come in. They have these nice ones where you can have a spherical operator, so you can approximate to a sphere. You can make an iso surface. You can do like contour lines. So I'm actually going to, on top of this airplane, I'm going to put a contour plot, the pressure of around the plane. And so you can start seeing where I'm getting multiple pieces of information there showing up. But actually, I don't like that kind of contour plot. I prefer this kind better. And you can start tweaking all sorts of these things. So I'm going to make the mesh not so bright so I can see the contour plot better. And I'm going to put this on black. So now you can start seeing, I mean, of course, I'm doing this very quickly, but if you want to start modifying this and you can start pulling out other piece of information, it can also understand vector data, which exists in this data set here. And so you can have streamlines, so you can actually have, you can actually follow a particle field over the airplane. And then you can also, of course, you can have the colors of the streamlines represent different types of data at the same points that those streamlines pass. So it's just a generic plotting tool, but it has more constraints than a truly generic tool like that is capable of going to extreme scale. So that's really all I had. It was really just a demonstration of capability. Don't feel like this is the one tool you have to use if you want to do this. There's other ones out there. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
I have a question about eye tracking, camera format.
Sure.
I'm doing research in school and education. If we want to have teachers like capture their class interaction with the eye tracking, is that better to come to your lab and borrow the device, or we should buy ourselves first?
Well, that's actually a very good question. So basically, you're interested in eye tracking, but you have you want to do it on a large scale, or you want to do a lot of eye tracking for your group. And a lot of times, the way that we work is if someone wants to do something new for the first time, we're a good group to come and talk to and try to build up those prototypes, those initial options. But then if you see yourself using it on a daily basis, then it would become more of an investment for your group. And so a lot of times we help people explore the technology, try to work out the bugs, try to figure out how to best use it. but then sometimes the technology goes and sits with the individual who originally purchased it. In other cases, like for example our handheld scanner, that was purchased with paleontology. They needed it to scan in some mastodon bones. And so what they did was they contributed some money, we contributed some money, we got the scanner, they were able to use it for their purposes, but then it sat at the 3D lab and anyone can use it then. So there's a lot of different ways that we can handle that sort of situation.
So if you want to apply the grant
Mm-hmm.
to NSF,
Yes.
you may need for that.
It'd be good to. And we often help with the grant process. So we often get included in grants. We often help with the writing of the grant. We help on many different levels. And if it is something that is going to require special equipment, special resources, we like to at least have the conversation ahead of time because, as mentioned, as a shared resource, we have to balance a lot of different projects. And it's good to know what's coming down the pipe or potentially coming down the pipe.
And can you have something like transferring data from the classroom to a server live?
Potentially. We'd have to see what the data is and what you want to do with the data. But there's lots of options for transferring data around. So. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you for coming here. There's going to be a birds of a feather discussion here. There's going to be a couple tables, one of which will be discussing augmented reality and virtual reality over lunch. So I think the plan right now is everybody goes and gets some lunch from the usual spot, which is out the hall to your left, and then going to the birds of the feather table that you would like to sit at and talk with. So, and if you want to see the 3D TV, feel free to come right on up and experience it. All right, thank you again.
What's up, Andy?
Which one is this?
This is
Why was
that.
how do you like change that question? This one?
I'm gonna do one more thing. Everything you want me to put on my, like, big font ones.
Okay, that makes me feel really good about putting it back because
Okay.
I had exactly the same worries, so.
All right. I think it's time to get started. This session, we have a group of outstanding young scientists who are here to talk about their work with cyber infrastructure. And our first speaker of the day is Stephanie Senzel. So.
Why is this? Okay, I'm not Mac friendly. How do I? That's what I'm trying to do. It's not.
right there.
Oh, okay. Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Stephanie Stenzel. I'm a PhD student in the School of Public Health in epidemiology. And so I just wanted to start out with a little bit of my background. The point being that I have had absolutely no experience with high performance computing or cyber infrastructure before I started working on my PhD, but also before I started working on some very specific projects in the last year. So my background is in microbiology and then in epidemiology, which I'll explain what that is, because a lot of people ask me, oh, do you study skin diseases? And that's not really what it is. So anyways, my point was that I had no experience in this area whatsoever. So epidemiology is actually the study of the distribution and determinants of disease in a population with the goals of informing prevention and intervention design. And so I'm actually interested in genetic risk factors for disease. So if anybody attended the genomics panel and Gonzalo was talking about his research yesterday, it's somewhat similar to what he does. And so this figure just shows that there are types of variants. On the y-axis, there's effect size, so how significantly these particular genetic variants contribute to disease risk. And on the x-axis, there's allele frequency, so how common those genetic variants are in the population. And this just shows that, I don't know if I have a, does this slide? No, I guess I don't. I can't point. But the point of this slide is just to show that there are different categories of variants. Oh, you can see here. So there are rare alleles that can cause Mendelian or, oh, thank you, or single gene disorders. There are low frequency variants with intermediate effect, and then common variants, which are usually low penetrant susceptibility alleles that together in combination are thought to be the causes of common diseases. And so there are actually different methodologies and approaches that we use to help to discover these different types of variants depending on what we know about the genetic basis of that disease and more specifically how common they are in the population. So for these common disease, common variant hypotheses, we'd be looking more at large population-based studies, which is in the epidemiologic context. I'm just gonna try again. Oh, okay. And you can do candidate gene studies looking at specific gene regions or genome-wide association studies, which are more an agnostic approach to look at genetic risk factors, either SNPs or indels or other types of variants with disease. So this is just to show for some of these other categories, you can take a different approach, which is what I'll talk about why I'm using high-performance computing, our genome or exome next-generation sequencing methods. So recently there's been a shift from genetic or looking at specific genes to genetic epidemiology looking at genome-wide risk, like genomic risk for disease. And mainly I'm focused on colon cancer and childhood leukemias, but we're also looking at congenital heart disease because of a collaborative effort between my advisor and his brother. So candidate gene studies definitely still have value, but high throughput genetic technologies are what are letting us do agnostic investigations for variant associations with disease risk. And we can use bioinformatic tools to identify candidate genetic risk factors that we can then move into population-based or epidemiologic studies, which would be too expensive to do at this point still really whole genome or whole exome studies in thousands and thousands of individuals. 1,000 genomes is a great start, but if we're looking at populations of 30 to 40,000 people, it's just really not feasible right now. So moving more quickly. Okay, so my dissertation research, just in an umbrella sense, is using epidemiologic methods to identify genetic contributions to complex disease etiology, so diseases where there are multiple genetic variants that contribute, their environmental influences, something like cancer or heart disease or something that's not a single gene Mendelian disorder. So the two highlighted at the bottom are projects that I'm working on that I use cyber infrastructure for. So the first is genome-wide association study to look at low penetrant susceptibility alleles for colon cancer, looking at a specific founder population of Ashkenazi Jewish individuals in northern Israel. And the second project is doing whole genome sequencing to identify candidate genetic variants that's causing congenital heart disease in a specific family. And so this just gives you an idea of that family where we have DNA on the father, our proband, or how we recognize this family. That probands 2 half-siblings and now a newborn son who's not affected. So anything colored in black means the individual is affected. So using high-performance computing, and I'll explain how in a second, we can actually identify genome-wide variants that are, genetic variants that are shared between those who are affected and that are not shared in the family with those who are unaffected. So where does cyber infrastructure come in? Basically, a lot of it is in data transfer and storage. So if we do whole genome sequencing on these individuals and on other studies that we're working with, we need somewhere to put the data and how to access it and for analysis purposes. And also for the first project I was talking about in colon cancer, we have high throughput genotyping data. We ran the 0.5 million SNP chip, which gives you a ton of data if you're talking about 1,000 or even up to 20,000 individuals. So we have that challenge of where do we store it and how do we access it for analysis purposes. And then for the family I was just showing you with congenital heart disease, we ran next generation sequencing on 3 individuals so far, and we're getting the data back for 2 more. But this is where this analysis pipeline is where high performance computing comes in, where you have these millions and millions of paired end reads and you need to align them to the reference genome and then do some realignment and local recalibration and to do variant calling and then kind of checking that quality and refining your genotypes based on other information that we already have. So this just shows that process in a bit more detail, but basically you start with your raw reads that come off the sequencer, you map them to the reference sequence, and you kind of go through this process till you have reads that are ready for analysis, and you run it through a pipeline in order to call different types of genetic variants. And then from that, you kind of have to do this refinement sort of process. And all of this is using, so far, I've been using the Flux cluster to accomplish all of these things. So I'm going to skip through this just in the sake of time. But so, as I said, I didn't know anything about, I didn't even really know what Unix was. I mean, it was really, I was starting from complete scratch. So my friend gave me this book, Teach Yourself Unix in 24 Hours, and I read through the beginning of it. And I didn't go through the whole thing because a lot of it's about permissions and stuff like that, but at least it gave me a framework of what it was. And I went to another grad student in our department, and where she uses it all the time, and she said, just kind of showing me the tools that she uses, and this is how you call things up, and this is what happens when you can't actually visualize something, which I didn't really understand the concept of that, and directories, and I know it sounds silly, and it sounds silly to me now saying it, but at that time I just really didn't have any concept of this environment. And so then I found out about the Flux cluster through another student who had heard about it from someone else. We're not in the engineering school and don't really have any ties there. But we went to the training session and realized, hey, this could be a great resource for us because a lot of the servers that we're using, at least for the alignment parts of our next generation sequencing efforts, just weren't really big enough to do things in an efficient period of time. So I went to the High Performance Computing 101 class, which was really helpful after having gone to the Flux training, and I thought, I have no idea what you're saying. So then I finally got some scripts from some other programmers and people in collaborating labs, and I sat down with them and worked through their scripts. What is this doing? Why am I doing this? What are your goals here? And then it ended up with a lot of trial and error and just learning, just having some data and just really trying and see what happens. And then I have to thank Jeremy and Drew here in the front, because I think a key aspect of my learning was finding some really great programming support, because I'm not a programmer, I don't think I'll ever be, but they've done really, especially Drew, a great job not just helping me do things, but helping me learn how to do them myself so that in the future I can use it for different applications. And so not only them, but other people in the biostat department and in human genetics who do more bioinformatics work have been really helpful to me when I've gotten stuck and hit a lot of roadblocks. So that's it for me. Just wanted to share my perspective of a biology, public health background.
Can we ask questions?
Let's wait until everybody can follow.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have any, actually, if anybody has any specific questions for Dr. Brandon or her research? I think that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and ask those.
Yeah.
I can ask this question because I've
Oh, that specific family was not Ashkenazi Jewish. That was for the heart disease. But actually, my advisor runs the molecular epidemiology of colorectal cancer study, and he has a collaborator in northern Israel and in Haifa, and I can't remember the name of the hospital off the top of my head. But they actually have a large population-based case control study of about 3,000 cases and 3,000 matched controls, and those samples are here at Michigan. So. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Our next talk is by Jordan Rowley, who will also give his insight into what he's learned.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Jordan Rowley. I'm in the Department of MCDB. That's Molecular, Cellular, and Developmental Biology. And I'm a molecular biologist in training, and just this last year I've started getting more into the bioinformatics type analyses. And what we do in our lab is epigenetics. And we look at how different regions of the genome are silenced through various proteins and modifications to DNA. And so what we focus on for the bioinformatics section is you have in the cells that your DNA is packaged into these nucleosomes, and they have histones, and it's very well organized. And there's quite a few things that you can do with next generation sequencing. You can look at histone modifications, these nucleosome positionings, these sites where proteins are bound. You can look at RNA levels as well as DNA methylation. And these are all things that we're doing in the lab, is looking at these different modifications and RNA levels in protein bound regions. And I have to mention that we do this through, well, next generation sequencing, and we use Illumina, which in the process, Stephanie mentioned this briefly, where you fragment your DNA. Sorry, this is so light, but you fragment your DNA into short pieces. You feed them into the Illumina machine, in this case the HiSeq, and you get out quite a bit of data. And these are, it spits out base calls. It spits out a large amount of data, and where I come in is I match the reads up back to the genome to see where they line up and figure out these different functions of the proteins or these modifications. And we visualize this. This is a server that I've put up where, in the case of protein-bound regions, when you sequence, you can do a process called ChIP-seq, where you pull down a protein and you pull down these fragments of DNA associated with that protein. And any region that is bound with that protein, you will see enrichment of those sequences that you have pulled down. And so here you can say that a protein is bound, especially if you have a negative control right here where you see no enrichment right there. And so that's one of the major applications that we use the technology for, is for to see regions bound by our proteins of interest. Another aspect is DNA methylation, and the process is a little bit more complicated, but basically you have a protocol which converts unmethylated cytosines into uracil, and then you can sequence that and you can figure out which bases are methylated and which are not. And that way you can associate, say our protein is involved in DNA methylation, you can overlap methylation sites with your protein binding sites and see if those are correlated in the same regions. And then you can also take, the important part is you can take your mutants of these proteins and do your DNA methylation analysis and see if you lose that methylation or not, and see if they're genome-wide for these modifications. And something else that that I've been doing is I've been gathering data from all different sources in order to do of a systems biology type of aspect, and looking at NCBI has a database where you upload your large your data sets, and I've been able to gather quite a bit of different data sets, and I've been looking at these and doing correlations with my own data sets, and I've come up with quite a number of hypotheses just alone by looking at other people's data, and we've been able to figure out some interesting things. Now, that's what I do with bioinformatics. How I got started, I was pretty scared of all things computers before this year. But I saw Linux as kind of a black box of unknown. I was too scared to touch it. And I got started just by I went to a short course at the University of California, Davis, and that kind of it gave me more confidence than actual tools to use, but the confidence is a really important aspect of it. And one of the major helps that I've found is just by searching online for how to do different things. I mean, it's trial and error, and then you go and see what other people have done, and there's a great resource called Seek Answers, which is a great forum to get answers for any questions you have. And that's how I got started in bioinformatics, and those resources have been a great help to me. And I'm the first one in our lab doing any of this kind of analysis in our department, really. And we've had a little bit of trouble with the IT department giving us some fights. I've had to fight to get this server to go up online and everything. But using Flux, we've started out with that and moved to our own Linux station. But Flux was a great tool to start us out. Galaxy is another tool. It's kind of a GUI type online based application for next generation sequencing analysis. And yeah, those are the tools that I can think of that have been really helpful. And thank you.
Any questions for Jordan? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Our next speaker is Heidi Phillips from the Department of Chemistry.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Oh, good. How do I do the regular show?
It shows up regular on top.
Oh, it is. Oh, it's in presentation. Oh, great. Okay. So, so like he said, oh my. So I had a bunch of pictures of molecules on here. Maybe they're faintly showing up. But my talk is about how I became involved in computational chemical research. And so, so first I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do. And so I use electronic structure calculations to understand charge transfer systems. So for instance, I look at how an excited electron on this part of this molecule, this is one of the molecules that I study, on how an excited electron on this part of the molecule can be transferred to different parts of the molecule, and how and why it is transferred within this molecule. So the way that I do that is we use a quantum mechanical approach. And so in quantum mechanics, the Schrodinger equation allows you to calculate the energy of a system. So if you know basically the forces acting on your system and the state that your system is in, then you can calculate the energy of that state. But you can really only solve this equation exactly when you have a system that has a molecule that has one electron. And so we are interested in more complex systems, such as these molecules here. And so we obtain an approximate solution to the Schrodinger equation. And the way that we do that is through using density functional theory. And so this is an equation that's not really important to you, but it's basically explaining what we do with density functional theory. We represent the energy of the molecule can be represented by the electron density of that molecule. And so in using that electron density as the state of our system, we can then calculate the energy of our system. And so, so what I specifically do is I address the problems in density functional theory where density functional theory doesn't actually treat charge transfer systems. So for example, an electron on one of these molecules can actually be transferred to this other molecule through this process. And there's a problem with our methods in calculating those charge transfer energies. And so what I do is I use and work with people who develop these new functionals that will correctly treat these types of systems. And so for instance, these types of systems are useful in photovoltaic materials and energy applications and things like that. So that's what we're interested in looking for. So, so in order to do these calculations on these large systems with electrons, we have to use high performance computing. And so we don't run on this cluster, but I thought this was a nice picture. It looks pretty cool, of a high performance computing cluster. So, so the way that we use this is these equations are solved using a self-consistent field method, and that's how we find the molecular ground state, so the lowest energy state that your molecule's in. So first what we have to do, so remember we're solving this Schrodinger equation with a different method, but this is the basic idea. So we first need to know the state that our system is in, and so in order to do this, we need to create a guess wave function or a guess initial density for our electrons. And so we do that by choosing a basis set. And so we have n basis functions to represent our molecular state. And so the more accurately we want to describe a system, we have to use a larger number of basis functions. And so if you're describing a large molecule like the pictures that I showed before, that can be in anywhere in the hundreds of basis functions. So these are a lot of basis functions that we're using to get the accuracy that we want. So then once we choose our basis set, then what we have to do is calculate these, what's called the Hamiltonian matrix integrals and the Hamiltonian matrix element and the overlap integrals. So there are all these integrals that we have to solve once we know our basis functions. And so this just kind of goes down on how we can calculate that according to this equation here. And so we end up with this final equation that we need to solve. And so we can calculate this Hij and we can calculate this Sij according to our basis functions. But what we really want is to know these energies here. So then we have to form the secular determinant where, so that we can calculate the roots, which are our energies, that will give us a non-trivial solution to these equations. And then once we have our roots, then we need to solve the linear equations that will give us these basis set coefficients right here. And that's what we're looking for. And that will give us the state of our system. And when we know our state and we know the forces acting on it, then we can calculate the energy. And so what we need to do to get us, once we have this, we need to run this in a self-consistent way so that we repeat steps 3 and 4 until we're able to say that our coefficients are converged. So we have an acceptable state. They're not changing very much each time we do these iterations. And so that's basically why we need to use these high computing resources in order to get the answers to these questions we're asking. So like everybody else, when I started out doing, my first experience with computational chemistry, it was an undergraduate, and I did not like it. My first experience was using a program package where we had these kinds of inputs that to me are just commonplace now, but
I had no idea what these things meant when I started out. And so my problem was that I really didn't understand the theory behind the software packages that I was using. So inputting these parameters that I was using made no sense to me. I didn't know what was going on. I wanted nothing to do with this because it was so confusing, didn't understand what was going on. So when I entered grad school, I wanted nothing to do with computational chemistry. I just decided I will go with a laser lab and do experimental physical chemistry work. No computation. Luckily for me, the professor that I wanted to work with the summer before coming to grad school already had a student working for him that summer. So I wasn't able to work in that lab, and he suggested that I worked in a computational lab to gain some experience when I then work for him in his lab. So kind of, I guess, sad for him that he didn't get another student to join his lab, but I actually ended up really enjoying my computational experience that summer, and so I stuck with it. So made me happy. And yeah, no experiment, just computation for me in grad school. And so this brings me to the question of, so I came in with zero computational experience, actually kind of a negative attitude towards computational chemistry. And so then I just kind of had to start using it. And so the way that I learned how to use CI specifically were the nice people in my lab. And so these are specifically the people who helped me the most when I first started out. I knew nothing of Linux, Unix, anything like that. I had no idea what was going on. But this graduate student who graduated, so he's now Dr. Alex Prochik, he taught me all the basics of using Linux. He taught me how do you submit a calculation to a high-performance computing cluster. I had no idea. And so he kind of went through everything with me, walked me through it. I felt a little bad for him because he was trying to finish his dissertation when I came in, so he was very nice. And then also during that summer, my advisor who I was working for, who's my advisor now, along with Eitan Geva, Barry Dunitz, helped me understand the theory behind the programs that I was using, and which was a big problem for me before. I didn't understand what was going on under the software and everything. I didn't understand it. So he helped me explain that to me, and he actually helped introduce me to some basic coding and showed me the underlying code so I could see how these equations were being solved with the program packages that I was using. And then once I kind of got involved in doing these calculations, the postdoc that I work with, Xiaoyi Zhang, he really helped me learn more about what else I can do now that I know the basics. So these were a major help to me. And then also in the Brooks group, and I don't think I have that, in Professor Brooks' group, the manager of their computational facilities for the Golem cluster, David Braun, he also helped me understand how to actually start using these computational resources and things like that. And then, so once I got my start, I found that the Flux and CAC training sessions were available, and those were exactly what I needed. And so I don't know if anyone else thinks of Back to the Future when they say Flux, but that's the first thing that pops into my mind. So, but these training sessions were really helpful because over the summer, I gained a ton of knowledge. It was kind of all mixed up, but then when I went to these training sessions after getting this basic knowledge, they kind of helped organize all my thoughts about how these high-performance computing clusters work. And so I've actually attended, that first year, I probably attended like 2 or 3 of the same session just to get the repetition, and it's really helped a lot. So if you do, if you know people who are not sure what to do, I would definitely suggest attending multiple of these sessions because it's very helpful to hear it once and then to hear it again once you kind of have an understanding of what's going on. And also, so with the Flux training, actually Jeremy Hallam was able to come and talk specifically to our research group when Flux went up, and that was really helpful too, so we could understand the differences in using the CAC resources, the NICs, Is it still called Nix? Okay, yeah. Okay, I don't use it anymore, so. But using Nix, the difference is in using Nix and Flux, and that was really helpful. So the CAC people and the Flux people were support that were definitely necessary for me to kind of get a feel of what's going on and to really understand the high-performance computing clusters. And also, I took my first semester in grad school, I took a mechanical engineering special topics course that was taught by Professor Don Siegel. And it went into the basic theory of understanding atomistic, what is it called? Computational modeling of materials. And so that gave me, again, the underlying theory of what these programs that I'm using are actually doing. So that was really helpful to me. So for me, actually, all those things were really helpful. And then the most important thing for me was to, this is really cheesy, but to just do it, really. To just start doing this computational research. So I really didn't understand everything I was doing that summer I first started, but I was running these calculations. I was getting my hands dirty with trying to get things to work. I came across problems. I didn't really know what was going on, but as I solved these problems, I started to figure out how things were working. And so that really helped me gain a more thorough knowledge of how to do these calculations, of why I'm doing them, and why they work. And then my last comment would be that people are usually nice, and they want to help you learn how to do this stuff. So people in your labs, people in your departments are generally pretty helpful when someone is just starting out. They're helping. And so afraid to ask people. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is they say that they're busy. But even then, if people are busy, they will usually give you some good resources that you can use, like an online tutorial or a website, or they might suggest you, the Flux or CAC training sessions and things like that. So you can learn a lot from the people around you, and that's probably the most important resource I can think of. Okay. That's it.
Does anybody have any questions for Ivy?
Mechanical engineering course you took?
Yeah.
What kind of computer resources did they use?
At that time, we signed up as a class for the Nix cluster.
Oh, so is that your first experience with Nix?
That was my first experience with Nix, yeah. Yeah, before then I didn't really know. We used the Professor Charles Brooks Golem cluster, but that was my first experience with Nix, yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you.
And our fourth and final speaker is Abraham Gong.
Yeah, Abe is good.
Abe is good, all right. From political science and public policy. There you go.
All right. Let's see if I can full screen this.
There you go.
Aha. Okay. This has been really interesting, actually, comparing and contrast. I've been scribbling notes on what's been similar in my experience and what's been different. And I'm not going to burden you with all that, but we can talk about it afterwards in Q&A. So I am the token social scientist in the room. I study political blogging, and I feel like a lot of what I've been doing in my research has been going to computer science and the School of Information and other reasonably teched up places and bringing fire down from the mountain and explaining it to social scientists and getting them excited about it. And it's been really interesting. So this, Okay, yeah, there's the whole presentation for you. So I study political blogs, just to reference this. This is the slightly washed out picture of Michelle Malkin's blog. I don't know if we have any political blog readers in the room, but she's a very right-leaning, slightly rabid, very popular political blogger. And I use this as an example in a lot of descriptions to people who are not as familiar with political blogging. So in my research, I take blogging as a form of political participation, a form of activism. And half of the research, the first half really, was proving to people that blogging really does work like activism. The same sorts of things that wake people up in the morning and make them write letters to their congressman or go participate in protests or occupy Wall Street are the same sorts of things that get other people to write a political blog about whatever. So that was the first half of the research. The second half of the research is bringing that back and saying, in the blogosphere, there are all kinds of data that we have about activism that we don't have about other forms of activism. So when you look at systematic study of activism, it mostly relies on survey research. And there are a lot of great things about survey research, and there are a lot of things you can't do very well there. So a big part of my dissertation has been playing the strengths of these different types of data off against each other. Part of that is text mining. So in surveys, you have very little text. You have a lot of agrees and a lot of very importance, but you really don't have very many open-ended answers because they're hard to analyze, and it's hard to convince people to fill out a long survey that has lots of open-ended questions. Bloggers, on the other hand, are more than happy to tell you whatever they're thinking about that day. So a big part of my dissertation, the computational part, has been going out, identifying political blogs, downloading or scraping them, and then parsing the text from them to make sense of them. So this is actually a table. I know it's displayed as a word cloud, but it's a table from a regression analysis that goes through and figures out which words are good predictors of politicalness and which words are not. So Obama, political, govern, senator, Republican, all these words are pretty strongly associated with politics. And the blue words are things that you find on the internet that are not political. Love, home, photo, museum, film, a go. If you see these things, you're probably not looking at political content. So anyway, interesting illustration of the technology. Another thing you can do is network analysis. So these are not blogs, this is from Twitter. We were looking at candidate Twitter feeds in collaboration with some friends in the School of Information and trying to see who cites each other, who links to each other, who retweets. And not surprisingly, a lot of the red people and the yellow people who are Tea Partiers from the last election link to themselves and to each other, and you don't have a whole lot of cross-party linkage. Not zero, but not a lot either. So anyway, that's the flavor of the kind of research that I'm doing. In terms of learning curve, I think my experience has been a little bit different there. I was a programmer for my first year. I was a computer science major in college. So I did a lot of programming in high school, actually, and then turned away from it and did different things for a few years. So for me, this was coming back to an old skill that I knew before. Now, I didn't really know Linux, and I didn't know Python or any of the natural language processing tools that I know now, but I think the process of learning to program is sort of a thing that you have to learn on its own, and once you've got it, you can bring that back pretty quickly. So it took me some time to learn these new tools, but I didn't get the sense of intimidation that I've heard a little bit of. Yes?
Had you done any scripting?
What do you mean by scripting?
Pardon? C Shell, Perl, any of that sort of stuff before?
No, I mean, I did C++ and some HTML. So, yeah.
That kind of program.
Yeah, that kind of programming. Yeah, I mean, real hardcore computer science stuff. Yeah. So tools that were useful on this go-around, I've affiliated with the Center for Complex Systems, and they have a nice lab down in the basement of West Hall. It's sort of a, I'm not going to say that. It's a great resource. And the system administrators who are there almost constantly were really helpful for me as I was getting started in Linux and somewhat in Python. I picked and chose pretty carefully to do well-supported languages, and so I could learn most of what I needed to online. I haven't heard anybody mention Stack Overflow yet. I don't know if that's a resource that other people use, but so it just sprung up in the last couple years. It's a question and answer site for getting feedback on programming questions, and I found that for most of the things I've been doing, it's been a phenomenal resource. I'll put up a tough programming question, something that's baffled me for hours, and I'll usually get a response back in less time than it took me to realize I needed to go to the site. So I've kind of got in the habit of, at the end of a long day, when there are problems I just can't crack, I post them all to Stack Overflow, and the next morning they're solved for me. So anyway, site worth knowing. I mean, it's not magical. You still got to do the work, but somebody out there has already solved your problem or something similar, and they'll give you feedback on it and tell you how to do the same thing. I should also mention that I've had an education and research grant from Amazon, and that's been really helpful to just have a server where I can throw stuff and store data and have lots of computational time available. So those resources have been great. I haven't used Flux yet, but I keep meaning to. I keep thinking about it. So that's mostly what I have to say here. I'm happy to do question and answer. I think a lot of the themes that I was going to talk about have been addressed already. So yeah, with that, thank you.
So what kind of computational needs do you have? I mean, what, if you were to use Flux, do you have boatloads of data that you need to get big data?
Yeah, so this is big data. The problem is the research pipeline is a little bit different. I don't know up front exactly what sorts of analysis I'm going to be doing. So boatloads of data in this case is a few hundred gigabytes. If it's unprocessed, it's maybe a couple terabytes of political blog posts. So I guess I didn't show you the numbers. One of the first things I did was index as many political blogs as I could find, but basically all of them. And there are not quite 500,000 English language political blogs. Most of them have zero traffic and are just sort of vanity blogs where somebody's posting whatever they're thinking about. But they're out there. There are a lot of them. So that was step one. Step two is getting a largish sample, several thousand of those, and downloading all of them. And by the time you've done that, you have several million blog posts and a lot of data to crunch through. So that's the heavy computational part. Since I do most of my work in Python, I've been persuaded that Flux and HPC is probably not the best place to go, just because I'm not optimizing things. It's just a matter of running large batches and getting answers back quickly. So I went to the MapReduce section this morning, and it's something I've been meaning to learn, and I'm going to try it out this afternoon if I can.
You look like a map based on.
Yeah, well, I mean, it massively parallel, right? So 3 million blogs, put those in a file storage system somewhere, and then MapReduce them. Mm-hmm.
You said you were making some notes that compared your experience with the other students' experience. I just wondered if you want to share them.
Yeah, so just a couple things I have noted down. One is that I guess I didn't realize how much of a blessing the prior programming experience was. So I didn't speak Linux, but I wasn't intimidated by it. Having figured out C++, like C++ is a bear, and Linux is not a whole lot worse. So, having beaten one bear, you're confident that you can do another one. Another one is just not using Flux. So I think all three were basically high-performance computing. And for me, to the extent that these labels mean anything, I'm more in the big data category of things. It's exploratory analysis. It's not so much about squeezing out every tiny bit of computation I can get as about plowing through data very quickly and checking a lot of hypotheses as fast as possible. So the workflow is different there. And I guess the other thing that I don't even think about as unusual anymore is, as a social scientist, there isn't a whole lot of this going on in my department. There are people who are interested in it, but most of the tenured faculty have their own things going, and they're not interested in investing a whole lot of time in something that's totally new. Some of them are, but none of them have done so really yet. So the support network for it is a little different, I think.
Another question? Just a comment.
Mm-hmm.
How far along are you in the grad program?
This is my 4th year.
You may want to see, maybe look at algorithms, looking for a co-advisor or someone talking to school implementation, or some Caterpillar, or several other people doing that to do stuff. And do things so close to what you're doing, I think they'd have a lot of help to you, and probably a number of their students would be, then you have a community you can bounce some of these ideas off. You say, I'm sure it's hard in social science, but see what they can do.
So when I don't have deadlines pressing, I'll go and take my laptop and just sort of work in the School of Information and bump into people. And by now I know Lotta pretty well. I know Drago. I'm working on a project with Aton. So it might be nice to make that more formal, but the loose, informal structures work. I mean, SI is good at that. SI is really good at that kind of collaboration. But thanks for the comment. Thanks for the suggestion.
I mean, a nice thing about grad, the way the doctoral committees are put together, they're bound to schools that they grow, so
Mm-hmm.
it's very common that there's a lot of thesis committees, it can be a nice formalization.
Yeah. That might be worth doing just to make it official. Thank you.
Before we get too far along, is there a handheld mic we could use back there, or? No? All right. So we're gonna have to do things sort of, like, we could do it around the round table. If people have any questions for the group all together, that'd be a good time. Okay, okay. So we'll go up one at a time whenever there's a group type question. If feel free. If you guys don't feel uncomfortable doing that, that's cool. Sharon.
From the, if you could ask the university for something, what would you be asking for? Would you be asking for more courses? Would you be asking for more online material, support groups?
I'm not sure. I mean, classes help to an extent. In that when you have examples to use and everything, you actually try, kind of like people were talking about, just do it and try doing it, that's helpful. But I don't know that I would, I mean, I guess I haven't really taken any I mean, like the workshops, but I haven't really taken any courses because there haven't really been any, except for actually this semester. I don't know if anyone's actually interested in next generation sequencing stuff, but for the first time in Biostat, they're offering, it's 8:30 next generation sequencing, basically data processing course, and how to do that. So if anyone's interested in that, I'd be happy to talk to them about it. But I wish that I had someone, or there was a more formal group to help you start. And it was just that. It's like, I was happy to try just doing it, but I didn't even really.
One of the things I heard from almost all of you is that it was kind of hunting around in the dark trying to find somebody who could answer your questions, or that there was no central resource that said, okay, if you want to know more about high performance computing, take Charles's course, or take HPC 101, that sort of thing. And we see that, I mean, we onboard new faculty, and there really isn't a checklist that says, okay, new faculty member, what research needs you have? What do you need for computing? And so, I mean, that's kind of what I heard as a common theme with all four of you, was that you kind of found this stuff by your own. You had to be motivated to go out and ask questions and find the right people to talk to, you in your lab, and it sounds like you have collaborators in your lab too. That it would be nice if we could come up with some way to get everybody, when they come in and say, if you're ever thinking about doing, if you're not completely scared of computing, here are resources.
I really agree, and it's hard to know, when you don't have any experience with this, it's hard to know what you don't know. And I didn't even know that high performance computing was a thing. Like I just didn't know. So finding some way, even just, I mean, which has been great for you guys, into medicine, just having a link to different departments, because we don't, all of us are sort of, well, I don't know if I should say black sheep, but I mean, no one in my group really does, or in department does anything like this either. So it's just having, basically having a liaison, which is really helpful, so that even if they touch base every 6 months or something, knowing, are there any new students who are doing this sort of thing? And then if they had a checklist like, hey, you should do this, this, and that, just someone, basically a support person who would point you in the right direction. So.
I think courses can be kind of intimidating because they take so long to get to the interesting points. I mean, other people are interested in other points than I am. And so I think maybe university-sponsored short courses that are really focused, really specific might be very helpful in that regard. For example, there is a course on microarray data analysis, but microarray is kind of going the way of the buffalo right now, and it's kind of with next generation sequencing, it would be nice to get some very specific data analysis. This is ChIP-seq, RNA-seq, just very specific, and have a multitude of short courses instead of just one course trying to hit lightly on these different topics is, I think, a better answer to it.
Actually, I have something kind of similar to what he was just saying. So like I said in my introduction, I really liked the CAC training courses that were offered. But like he was saying, they're a little broad. And I know I think in the past, maybe they always were like this, but there's a bunch of different courses that are, or training sessions that are offered, and they're just maybe a couple hours long. But it would be nice if those training sessions could maybe be more specific to a certain discipline. So I do computational chemistry, but I attend these courses with a lot of different people in different disciplines. But it might be nice if there are a lot of computational chemists and material scientists at the University of Michigan. It might be nice if they offer one simply for people who are doing more similar calculations to like what I would be doing, or they offer a separate one for people who are doing calculations on, astrophysics or something like that. So maybe to even develop more narrow training sessions, I guess, what you would say. That might be nice too. That and short courses would be nice too.
I'll say my bit too. Is there a way to take this down?
Yeah.
Okay. We've seen enough of that, right? Two thoughts. One is, for all of us here who've gotten to the point where we have things to show from this, it's been project-based. It really hasn't been course-based. And I don't know exactly where to go with that. I think it's hard to build infrastructure around it, but it's really this problem-solving mentality that was mentioned earlier, where I'm working on this thing, I hit a roadblock, who can I ask for help? Oh, I'll fish around for a while, then ask for help there. But the thing that makes that work is the motivation to run into a roadblock, solve it, run into another roadblock and solve it. And for me, I've never been able to find that anywhere that wasn't with a specific project with an end in mind. Tied into that, one of the things that I've found difficult is knowing which tools to invest in. So this is one of the reasons I haven't done Flux yet, because I know there's a startup cost. I know it would take me at least a few hours, probably a few weeks to be able to use it proficiently. And it's really hard to know going in if it's going to be worth that time. I've had the experience several times of working really hard to understand a platform, and then at the end of the day realizing, oh, this doesn't do what I needed it to do. So if there's some way to lower the uncertainty for people getting into different tools, that would be really helpful. So I don't know what format that would take.
Any other questions?
I know you were kind of discussing this before, but also having even a website to go to with a list of contact information. I mean, having other students, other labs that are doing similar things would be very helpful as well.
Can I just put in a plug for our new website?
Right.
You'll get a mug on your way out and a magnet that has our URL, but that one of the things we have there are contact lists. We have a list of other groups that will build to be a bigger database. But most important, I'm asking this because I'm looking to find out what else would be helpful to put on the website. But thank you for the segue.
Speaking of websites, so one website that I really like is actually the Flux website. There's an area, I think it's called Getting Started or something like that. And that was actually good for me because there's some like YouTube tutorial, a reference guide, like a quick sheet that I printed out and I have it next to my computer, kind of silly things to get you started, which if people don't know about Flux, they wouldn't go there to find the site, but they might know about cyber infrastructure in the office in general. So something, maybe not duplication, but something similar to that might be helpful. Like, here's just a link to some resources.
Tom, did you have a question? Or did it answer? Charles?
So there's a question for all of you actually. So now that you know and have used Flux, what do you think about using something bigger for your research, say like Exceed or any of the national resources where you have many more cores than you have here? that helping your research? Would that be
Great
something?
question.
Yeah.
We actually just applied for a startup allocation at Exceed and got one, which I'm really excited to use because my problem with Flux, it's not about Flux itself, but I'm the only one using this, in my lab. And so it doesn't make sense for us to buy a huge allocation when I'm only going to use it a few days a month. And so I know there's the Flux on demand, portion, but in order to run large enough jobs, I have to ask for many cores. And if you want a job on the Flux on demand, then you get to the end of the queue and you don't run for several weeks even sometimes. So that was hard for me, and because I have big jobs, but I'm not running them that often. So that was an issue for me, and so that's why we decided to, apply to Exceed just so I could play around with it and see, if that might be more helpful for, kind of the sporadic high computing usage that I have.
Thanks. Anybody else?
Yeah, actually, one of the previous members in my lab, when he went to go do his postdoc, he started using Exceed, and he emailed all the people in our lab and said, you need to start using this resource. So that's definitely, we want to get started with that. We just haven't submitted a proposal for that yet. And that's my advisor over there who's giving me the thumbs up on that. Because because I'm in a computational lab, unlike you where you would be the only one running, we have a bunch of people running jobs, and in our allocation, they can get backed up. And so we might be stuck in the queue for a couple days. And so that's a little frustrating. So it'd be nice if we had even more nodes available to us. That would be really great. So we plan to do that in the future, in the near future.
Well, we actually invested in our own Linux station. We've invested quite a bit in different hard drives because when you're getting started, it's kind of hard to use a queue job submission type of cluster. I mean, with Flux, I would often just use the interactive one because I'd submit a job and I'd realize, oh crap, I did it wrong, and so I'd have to wait for the job to go through the queue, and I wasn't quite sure how to cancel it and everything like that, so I didn't have the best training. I didn't go to the training sessions, which I probably should have, but for me personally, I like having my own station where it's actually physically there, and I can I have a lot more versatility with it. I can install the programs that I need without having to ask someone or anything like that. So.
I haven't really used Flux, so I can't speak to it.
I would actually say the corollary question that I have is actually, so, I mean, we talked about, and this is a snapshot in time about where everybody is today. I mean, to what scale would you like to take things? Which in some cases is carrier graded, in some cases, in most cases, carrier graded. In your case, you have your workstation, you're very happy with what you have. Kind of, corollary question maybe more squarely into you is, what's your next step? What do you feel like your next cyber infrastructure resources you have?
So I don't have this mapped out well, but the next step that I know I need to take is cutting down my cycle time. So it takes me a long time and long time's measured in a few days at this point, to set up a project and start to run an analysis and figure out how that needs to look, and then just take it through all the steps to the point where I can test hypotheses and get back results. So for me, I don't know how this is going to happen. MapReduce may be part of the solution, but I'm trying to figure out ways to cut that back to where I can do it faster and faster. That's where I see good workflow coming from.
We mentioned your big data. How big is your big data? How many? Are you in the terabyte range?
Yeah, it's in a couple of terabytes. I actually haven't checked on it in a little while.
Okay. And is that local storage that you have?
Yes, it's in the complex systems lab mostly.
What I really need to do, a lot of the stuff that I've done is really hodgepodge. So I have scripts to do all sorts of different things, and Drew's helped me a lot, actually. But now I know what parallelizing is, and I understand the theory and the concept, but I don't actually know how to do it. So basically next steps for me are to kind of streamline everything that I have, put it all together, so it's more of a pipeline approach as opposed to do this and then run another job, and just making it sequential and also parallelizing the parts that can be.
there any other questions? Charles?
So, so if you could change one thing about Flux to help it, help you do your jobs better, what would it be? And it could be anything, you know, the hardware, the people, the software, the help. What would you change?
Two things.
Pardon? Yeah.
She can have mine.
I would say, first, I like the Flux on Demand idea, but like I was saying, it's almost impossible to do any big jobs using it in a reasonable amount of time. So either maybe more nodes allocated for on demand or some other system like that that you can actually accomplish something with. And then the second thing I hate is no backup, because, I mean, I have what is the extra storage stuff called? No, value storage. That's what it is, yeah. But just constantly having to be resaving stuff, because I have big, I'm in terabyte range files and everything on a daily basis, and so then you keep getting the hate emails from Brock that says you need to get rid of your stuff, but I don't have anywhere to put it, and I'm still using it, so that sort of thing. Because in your own home directory, there's not enough space, so I guess either more allocation for yourself or more flexibility with no backup. Maybe that would involve just more nodes in general. I'm not sure, but those are my two major qualms, if you will.
Thanks.
I would agree with the no backup. I like to save a lot of my Scratch files that I run because I run jobs from those, and so when I calculate certain parameters for the calculations that I do, I can generate a lot of Scratch files pretty fast. But I like to save those so that I can run the parameter calculation again, and usually it's within 1 or 2 days, so the amount of time I have to take saving it and taking it off and then copying it back and then recopying, and there might be a more efficient way to do that I don't know of, but to me it's way easier if I can say, okay, it's going to take me a week or so to get all these values, I just need to leave it there, would be a lot nicer than having to just take it off, put it back on.
I can answer those no backup questions.
Oh, that's great.
I think it's good news too. Why you get the hate mail from Brock? Who, by the way, doesn't hate you? I promise. Brock's a nice guy.
Hate to be an enforcer.
For those of you who don't know, this is Andy Caird. He's the director. What is your title these days?
I don't know.
Flux manager, guy in charge.
Operations director.
Operations director. I like that.
This is why I can answer this question because I think I can actually fix it. The reason we get those hate messages is not because you're using too much space or because it's been there too long, even though that's what it says. So the actual proximate cause for the message is that it's full for everybody. Then the people who get the message are people who have too much and it's been there too long. So there are two ways to solve the problem. One, don't leave so much there for so long, right? Or have more overall space. So the thing that I think I can control, Ken has a budget, he's right there, is getting more space. So as it turns out, it just so happens that in a couple of weeks, I think, certainly by January, we will effectively double the amount of space in the backup in terms of raw capacity, and we will also double its performance from disk to host. So it'll get faster, which will, if you read and write a lot to it, you'll see your jobs actually go faster. If that's a bottleneck for you, we'll see. Maybe we'll see. And we will have more space. In addition to that, what we did to get more space was essentially start over, which gives us a lot of room to get more space. So we made a big upfront investment in infrastructure that will then we'll see, right? It's sort of up to you guys how it gets used and stuff. We'll see, we can easily add more capacity, which will also add more performance. All of that comes with the big caveat that it is still Scratch space. I assure you that there will be a day, my guess is probably in the next 24 months, that we will erase everything on it by accident. I promise. It will happen. If there is something important you have, if you don't have a copy somewhere else and you cannot regenerate, do not leave it there. so far we've been lucky, right? And we'll fess up and say there have been 2 times in the past 3 years when we were literally minutes away from just starting over with no backup. And Brock said, oh wait, I think I know how to fix that. We were literally like, I was like, okay, let's just scrap it. And Brock was like, let me try one more thing. Those are twice. That's how at risk your data is on that file system. It is scratch space, and you should think of it that way.
Wouldn't Heidi's use of wanting to leave something there for a week be appropriate use of no backup?
It's totally appropriate. And whenever we send those to Heidi and she replies, says, and just be there for a week, we reply, no problem, thanks for letting us know. But we cannot
It's really like a month.
We cannot predict Heidi's intentions. For all we know, she's got, thesis.doc stored there. That would be like a really bad idea. But we don't investigate the data because it's impossible, right? It's literally hundreds of terabytes.
Yeah.
We cannot assess everybody's content and infer some intent or guess at their intent. So yeah, and most of the time we get a lot of replies when we send those out that say, which of course you don't see, which say, oh, it truly is scratch and I just need a few more days. And we tend to reply and say, hey, that's no problem. You're using it right. We just send a blanket email, sorry. So maybe you've gotten one of those replies too, if you want to reply to our mean messages. Yeah, so the 2 things are, one, we'll have more space, we'll have better performance. It's still scratch space, and don't put something important there.
So I'd advise you don't be copying things back and forth if it's really only going to be there a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing is about copying back and forth. If you haven't looked at the Globus Online stuff, there's some web pages on the Flux website about Globus Online. It's a file transfer tool.
Is that the one you need the M token for?
No.
Globus Online, you don't need it for the good FTP stuff.
Yeah,
Okay, because I know there's that new.
Right, so those would be much faster for transferring.
Okay, oh that's, yeah.
Pretty soon, but Globus Online, and Globus Online is even faster than that would be faster.
Oh.
That makes sense. There's a little bit of overhead in the setup, but it's very lightweight, and we can help you if you need it. That is a really great tool. It does a ton of optimization and file transfers. We don't yet have it so that you can get it to value storage super quickly, but it's something that we're working on. It's still faster than any other way you have today. It's just not as fast as we can make it. So the Globus Online is worth looking at. There's a web page in the Flux web pages about that. You can go to cc.engine and type in Globus find it in the search box. That could be useful for you. But yeah, if it's just there for a week, you should leave it there 2 weeks. That's what it's for. As long as it's truly scratch. And if you get a mean message in that 2-week window, you can either delete it or you can reply and say, if you're really one of the top, like, you get a special message if you're in the top 10.
Oh,
you
do? Okay,
special
got that
message,
yet.
You should, that one you should probably reply to and say, no, really, it's okay. And then we will, give you, in our heads, special dispensation. But we do hope to make that better for everybody. I think there are a lot of people who don't use it as scratch, and that's actually part of the problem. And they should, because it's scratch.
We did have somebody who had multi-terabyte only copy of all of their data that was on Flux.
I know
So,
that.
Yeah, and if you do that, it's just, that is really, really foolish. It's really a bad idea. Because we will lose it, I guarantee you. The system, because of its speed and capacity, also gets the commensurate complexity and risk. So, and we optimize for speed, not reliability, is another thing. So everything is optimized to go fast. It's not optimized to keep your data safe.
I just want to say something real quick before we finish up. I know I complained about Flux, but really I'm really grateful for it. Because, the engineering school, shouldn't really have to support me in the School of Public Health, and it's really great to have an option if, we're not going to buy a server ourselves, or, it's been a really great tool, and that's where I've gotten most of the support I've gotten. So while I have some minor complaints, I'm really lucky to be able to use it, so.
Thank you very much. I would point out that Flux is not actually an engineering school thing. So it started out there because it was the convenient place to birth it, but it's really a campus-wide thing intentionally. So in point of fact, Flux is there to support you in whatever school you're in on purpose. Engineering, which is where I'm from, we do appreciate the kind words because we feel like it's our baby still a little bit. It hasn't quite reached 18 years old. We kick it out of the house. It's still like it's fully young. But yeah, it is intended to be for anybody on campus without regard to school or affiliation.
And engineering
Jeremy's LS&A, right?
Yep.
That's right.
And Jeremy and I are medicine,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah, so there's,
yeah.
Yeah, each the several, so engineering, LS&A, and medicine and OVPR all chipped in money for the capital expense of building Flux up. And a number of units have been contributing staff time. And SPH, for instance, recently is contributing staff time with the Flux liaison, Chris so it is, we're trying to make it a campus, whatever. But it's, I can understand the confusion because the genesis of it, it really did kind of arise from what we were doing in college.
From
and it is operating that way.
Cool. Well, if anybody else has any questions, feel free to ask them afterwards. It is 2:30. It's time for the next session. Everybody, stay.
Just reminds me that you have a